Gold arrived in Jerusalem by the ton. Not seized. Not mined. Delivered. Traders from Sheba, merchants from Tyre, caravans laden with tribute disguised as gifts. At the center of it all sat Solomon, draped in purple, surrounded by scrolls and ledgers, orchestrating commerce with the precision of prophecy. He wasn't just a king. He was the CEO of a divine monopoly. And for 40 years, he turned wisdom into the most profitable brand in the ancient world. When Solomon ascended the throne around 970 BC, he inherited something unprecedented in the ancient Near East, a unified kingdom. His father David had conquered. Solomon would consolidate. The territory stretched from the Euphrates to the Egyptian border, a narrow corridor positioned at the most valuable intersection in the ancient world. To the south, African gold and ivory. To the east, Arabian spices and incense. To the west, Mediterranean trade networks connecting Egypt, Phoenicia, and the emerging Greek city-states. To the north, the land routes to Mesopotamia and Persia. Every caravan, every merchant fleet, every diplomatic envoy moving between continents passed through Solomon's territory. This wasn't an accident of geography. It was leverage. David had secured the borders through military conquest. Solomon would extract value through strategic positioning. He understood what many rulers never grasp, that controlling territory is expensive, but controlling trade routes is profitable. War consumes capital. Commerce generates it. His first act wasn't military expansion. It was a prayer for wisdom. But examine what he did with that wisdom, and a different picture emerges. Solomon didn't retreat into contemplation. He built infrastructure. He negotiated treaties. He deployed capital with the precision of a modern private equity firm acquiring strategic assets. Wisdom was his brand. Trade was his business. The foundation of Solomon's economic system rested on a principle older than currency itself, belief. He inherited divine legitimacy, the anointed king of a covenant people, builder of God's temple. But Solomon understood that faith could be structured, monetized, and deployed as economic policy. The Temple of Solomon wasn't just architecture. It was a central bank wrapped in theology. Construction required cedar from Lebanon, gold from Ophir, bronze from Cyprus, and labor from across the kingdom. Solomon partnered with King Hiram of Tyre, the maritime superpower of the Mediterranean. Tyre provided materials, craftsmen, and access to Phoenician naval technology. Solomon provided grain, oil, and access to Arabian trade routes. A bilateral trade agreement disguised as religious collaboration. But the genius was in the mechanism. The temple became the repository of national wealth. Gold tribute from vassal states. Silver from trade tariffs. Offerings from pilgrims. All flowing into a sacred treasury that functioned as sovereign reserves. Unlike secular palaces that could be challenged, the temple was untouchable. Divine authority protected what military force alone could not secure. Solomon built fleets with Hiram's engineers. These ships sailed to Ophir, location debated, possibly modern Somalia or Yemen, returning every 3 years with gold, almug wood, and precious stones. The Bible records that Solomon received 666 talents of gold annually from trade alone. At roughly 75 pounds per talent, that's nearly 25 tons of gold flowing into Jerusalem each year. Not from conquest. From commerce. He positioned himself as the middleman between Africa and Asia, between the Mediterranean and the Arabian Peninsula. Horses from Egypt were sold to Hittite kings. Chariots moved north. Spices moved west. And every transaction generated tariffs, tribute disguised as diplomatic gifts. Information was currency. Solomon cultivated relationships with rulers across 3 continents. When the Queen of Sheba arrived, she brought gold, spices, and precious stones, but she came seeking something more valuable. Knowledge. Access. Strategic alliance with the broker who controlled the crossroads. The visit wasn't romance. It was due diligence. She was assessing whether partnership with Solomon's network was worth the investment. Apparently, it was. But Solomon's wealth wasn't sustained by logistics alone. It was sustained by philosophy. And here's where the story deepens into something stranger and more modern than ancient history typically reveals. The Book of Proverbs, attributed to Solomon, reads like a handbook on behavioral economics written 3,000 years early. Strip away the theological framing, and what remains is a ruthlessly pragmatic understanding of human nature, risk management, and capital preservation. Diversify your portions into 7, or even 8, for you do not know what disaster may come upon the land. Portfolio theory. Hedging against systemic risk. Don't concentrate assets in a single venture or geographic region. The borrower is slave to the lender. Debt as leverage and control. Solomon understood credit relationships as power relationships, a lesson that would take Europe another 2 millennia to formalize. Time and chance happen to them all. Recognition of uncertainty. Even the wisest strategies encounter randomness. Prepare for volatility. Ecclesiastes goes further, offering a meditation on wealth that feels almost nihilistic in its honesty. Whoever loves money never has enough, whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. An acknowledgement that accumulation without purpose is a trap. That wealth pursued as an end rather than a means produces only emptiness. Solomon's wisdom wasn't mystical. It was empirical. He observed human behavior, greed, pride, envy, fear, and structured systems that accounted for it. His proverbs weren't moral platitudes. They were operating principles for navigating a world governed by scarcity, competition, and imperfect information. He understood that markets run on psychology as much as supply and demand. That reputation is a form of capital. That trust, once broken, cannot be bought back at any price. These weren't abstract philosophical musings. They were the intellectual infrastructure of his economic empire. But empires built on perception carry an inherent fragility. And Solomon's began to fracture under the weight of its own success. Maintaining infrastructure requires revenue. Revenue requires taxation. And taxation, pushed too far, breeds resentment. Solomon's building projects, the temple, palaces, fortifications, and fleets, demanded labor and resources on an unprecedented scale. He instituted forced labor conscriptions. He divided the kingdom into 12 districts, each responsible for provisioning the royal court for 1 month annually. The burden grew heavier as the projects grew grander. Then there were the alliances. Solomon married 700 wives and maintained 300 concubines, many of them foreign princesses. Each marriage was a diplomatic treaty, a trade agreement, a non-aggression pact sealed in matrimony. But each foreign wife brought foreign gods, foreign customs, and competing loyalties. The theological compromise eroded the ideological coherence that had justified his monopoly on power. If the king who built God's temple now permits altars to other gods, what remains sacred? If divine favor is negotiable, what makes his authority absolute? Economic systems built on belief collapse when belief fragments. By the end of Solomon's reign, the kingdom was wealthy but brittle. Gold filled the treasury, but discontent filled the provinces. When he died, his son Rehoboam faced a simple question from the northern tribes: will you lighten the burden your father placed on us? Rehoboam, advised by young courtiers drunk on inherited power, replied, my father made your yoke heavy, I will make it even heavier. The kingdom split. 10 tribes seceded, forming Israel in the north. Only Judah remained loyal to the Davidic line. The United Kingdom lasted exactly 2 generations, 73 years from Saul's coronation to Solomon's death to civil war. The pattern is ancient, but the lesson is timeless. Wealth concentration without equitable distribution breeds instability. Expansion without sustainability leads to collapse. And systems maintained through coercion rather than consent eventually fracture. Solomon's legacy isn't the gold. Gold corrodes, gets plundered, or melts into currency for the next empire. His legacy is the model he demonstrated, that capital and belief are inseparable. That wealth flows not just from resources, but from strategic positioning, information asymmetry, and narrative control. He proved that a relatively small territory could dominate regional economics by controlling trade networks rather than land. That divine authority could be structured into fiscal policy. That wisdom, packaged correctly, becomes a form of soft power more durable than military might. But he also proved the limits. That overextension destabilizes. That luxury corrodes discipline. That empires built on monopolies collapse when the monopoly breaks or the market shifts. Modern finance still operates on Solomon's principles. Brand as belief. Gold as trust. Empire as perception. The Federal Reserve doesn't control gold mines, it controls confidence. Corporations don't just sell products, they sell narratives. And every sovereign nation from ancient Israel to contemporary America understands that power rests not on force alone, but on the willingness of others to believe in your legitimacy. Solomon built an empire of gold. But it was belief that made it shine. And when belief faded, when the northern tribes stopped accepting the divine right of the Davidic monarchy, when foreign gods diluted theological purity, when taxation exceeded tolerance, the gold remained, but the kingdom didn't. The temple stood for another 370 years. But the United Kingdom? That lasted only as long as Solomon's ability to convince everyone that wisdom, wealth, and divine favor were synonymous. And the moment that equation broke, so did everything else. History remembers Solomon as the wisest man who ever lived. But wisdom, it turns out, isn't enough. You also need restraint. And restraint is the one thing unlimited wealth makes almost impossible to maintain.